and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, your friend, and your brother. In truth, I am Rasheed, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for giving me another hour of your day and another day of your time. I know how precious time is, so I really, really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart to the depths of my soul that you have chosen to give me just a few minutes of your time today. And I hope that it will be spent properly and that you will receive an equal or greater return for your time that you have shared with us. Now, I'm waiting for Dimitri to come into the booth. He's texted me and said that it's a go, and he should be in just a second. But before he comes in the booth, let's just discuss a few things. Oh, here he is in the booth right now. Dimitri is in the booth right now, so I'm gonna bring him right up on the screen. How's it going today, Dimitri?
Good, Rasheed. I'm so sorry about being late, and even sorrier that I didn't show up last time. I screwed up badly, and I appreciate your patience and your understanding.
Man, it's all good. Those are hiccups in life. Everybody goes through those hiccups in life. I know I'm one of the ones that go through them all the time. So if anybody can understand, I'm your man.
Thank you, brother.
Dimitri, before we talk about, because people don't know that you're in Palestine / Israel right now. Before we go,
no, I'm sorry, I have to intervene. I left 2 days ago. I'm now in Beirut.
Oh, he's in Beirut now.
Lebanon. Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay, before we go into the Middle East situation, what is your reaction on the blow up in Russia, and who do you think benefits the most from the terrorist attack that took nearly 200 lives over there?
Well, this is a situation where I don't think anybody benefits. I think there are people who think they will benefit, but I think they're terribly mistaken. And I think the people who are most likely to believe that they will benefit are the intelligence agencies of Britain and the United States, and to a lesser degree, the inner circle of people in Zelensky's government in Ukraine. But I want to qualify what I just said by acknowledging that I don't know, and I don't purport to know who committed this terrorist attack, and anybody out there, especially if they're outside the Russian government, because if you're outside the Russian government, you're not in a position to actually conduct an on-the-ground investigation, right? You're not in a position to interview all the witnesses and collect forensic evidence and review all the security tapes. So whatever you may think of the Russian government, however much you may or may not trust them, I don't think anybody can deny they are in the best position to gather the evidence and evaluate the evidence right now. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll tell us the truth. But if you're not in there, inside, examining the evidence, especially so quickly after this horrendous thing happened, you can't know with a high level of confidence what happened. And that's true of the American government that purports to know, and all the Western media outlets who are purporting to know. They don't know. Don't believe them. I don't know. All I can do, based on very limited information, is make some guesses. That's it.
So on that note, what you just said, why did the United States government come out with Kirby immediately saying it doesn't look like Ukraine has anything to do with it, and go along the line of what you just said? Since we are not in a position to know, how could he immediately right after that just go in and just hypothesize that there's no involvement of Ukraine?
I think if they're not terrified, they should be terrified. Kirby should be terrified. Biden should be terrified, and we should all be terrified, because this is probably the most aggressive provocation. If in fact the Russians conclude, rightly or wrongly, that the Western governments and/or Ukraine, which is a proxy of Western governments, orchestrated this thing, we're in a very, very dangerous position right now. They have been pushed and pushed and pushed. This is how they view it again. What everybody who's listening to us has to understand the distinction between what actually happened and what the Russian government believes happened. the first thing we should be concerned about is what the Russian government believes happened, because that's what's going to drive how they respond to this. Okay, whatever we may think is of lesser importance, and they have the ability to respond in a way that threatens the existence of all of humanity. So we should be very, very concerned about what they think, and I have no doubt that Kirby is very concerned about what they think, and so they're all coming out. It's not just for the sake of their own credibility and reputations, which are obviously at stake, because if they did this, if they had anything to do with it at all the nonsense that they tell us about, how terrible terrorism is and how they've been waging war on terrorism just will completely evaporate. It'll be completely discredited. But I think that they are trying very, very hard to convince the Russians that they're not behind this, because if the Russians conclude otherwise, who knows what they're going to do. I'm very, very concerned about what they're going to do. And the noises that are coming out of the Security Council of Russia should concern us all and not surprise us at all. It's not surprising that they see this as a serious, potentially a serious attack upon the Russian Federation, and one that requires the harshest of responses.
Do you think that the hubris of the U.S. government and the British government will put us, I know we're on the war footing, but will push us to war with Russia? Because it seems like every time a provocation happens and Russia allows it to pass, or Russia responds with minimal force, a greater provocation happens thereafter. And we can't, let us not forget that Victoria Nuland was before she resigned, was talking about all of these surprises that will happen to the Russian Federation. And then you had constant threats from the French president, and all of these things add up, and these are pieces to the puzzle that I think that the Russian Security Council and the Russian intelligence agencies are putting together with that bombing that took place, deliberately targeting young kids. What is your take on this?
First and foremost, in the West, there ain't no adults in the room. These people are crazy. I mean, you mentioned one critically important thing. This bloodthirsty psychopath, Victoria Nuland, coming out and saying that there were nice surprises in store on the battlefield for the Russian Federation. Rasheed, even if she actually did have nice surprises in store for the Russian Federation, whatever she meant by that, why would she say this publicly? I can't imagine what that person was thinking. And then you have the leak of a recording amongst German generals who are saying, in effect, we are going to deliver, or they're planning for the contingency, and clearly they wanted the contingency to be realized, of delivering Taurus missiles to Ukraine. And these are longer range cruise missiles, which can reach deep into Russian territory. And they're talking about actually using their own military personnel to help the Ukrainians deploy those missiles against Russian targets. And this thing is leaked at a time when Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, is saying something completely diametrically opposed to the German people, which is that we aren't going to send Taurus missiles. It's too dangerous. It's too risky. So you have that going on. Then you have these revelations in the New York Times. This is all happening within like the last 6 weeks, that there was like a network of CIA bases set up inside Ukraine near the border with Russia. And this is just, some of the things that have happened. I should mention another thing that's as important is that Ukraine, using the far right of Russian society, neo-Nazis in effect, who are opposed to Putin, using them and potentially regular Ukrainian forces to launch quite serious attacks into the Belgorod region of Russia, and trying to actually occupy communities. And people say, okay, well, that's fair game, under the laws of war. But they were actually shelling civilian areas and killing civilians. And they've been doing it for some time, and they've been escalating it, which isn't compliant with the laws of war. So you have all of this going on, and then we have this massacre in the heart of the Russian Federation capital. I can only say, whatever you think about who's behind this particular terrorist attack, the context in which this has happened, all these other things that I just mentioned, really, I think should alarm us all that we have nobody in positions of high responsibility and power in major Western states who behave and think responsibly and rationally. These people are nuts. I mean, I don't know what else to say. And it should be our highest priority to remove them from power and replace them with people who are sane.
And let us not forget that hours after the targeted killing of youth, Ukraine, quote unquote, Ukraine unleashed a huge barrage of drones trying to strike Russian territory again. And on top of that, I got a message from somebody that I keep in contact with from Russia, and they told me that on the ground, the people want blood. Some of the people want blood for blood. And could you blame them?
I'm sure they do. Whether you blame them or not, is anybody surprised? I mean, what do you expect them to do? This is horrendous. These people just walked in there and slaughtered. I mean, I think the death toll is now up to 140. It may well rise above 200 when you look at the number of wounded. They just went in there and systematically murdered people, and then tried to burn the house down with all kinds of people trapped inside in the heart of Moscow. This is undoubtedly going to provoke the highest levels of outrage across Russian society. And whatever people may think, the Russian government is not impervious to public opinion. At some stage, the emotions of the populace may become so heated that they have no alternative to respond. And I think we're pretty much at that point. So let us hope, I dearly hope, that they come to the conclusion that it was not the Ukrainian government that was behind this.
I thought we were at that point a while ago when they openly attacked the Kremlin with drones. And I thought that because if you would have done that to the United States immediately, they would have responded militarily. Or if you would have done that to someone in NATO, the United States would have used that as a casus belli to use military force. And I thought Russia was really passive when it came to that. And now I don't think there's any too much more wiggle room for Vladimir Putin to go a little easy on the Western world. I believe that the pressure is mounting for him to act sternly and strongly, because I was reading an article, as a matter of fact, there was an article on RT, and if I could pull it up, let's see real quick. There was an article on RT from one of the think tanks in Russia, and he was saying that Russia had lost its deterrent power, and I'm paraphrasing, and it's nuclear deterrent power, and it's time to restore that nuclear deterrent power. And words meaning that it was time to use the nuclear weapon on a NATO nation to let them know that we're not playing. So I mean, things are just unraveling and spinning out of control. But to me, when we look at the situation, let's just hypothesize for a minute, and this is just you and I bantering, going back and forth, feeding off of each other. Let's just say that it was Ukraine. But as I said with everybody, we know who pulls the strings with Ukraine. Ukraine has no military capability without the U.S. and NATO. It has no political clout without the U.S. and NATO, and it has no viability economically without the U.S. and NATO. So regardless of if it's Ukraine, it's the U.S. and NATO. And knowing that, and the Russian Federation knowing that, what do you think is going on in the bowels of power in Moscow right now, knowing that?
I think that they may not yet be having a serious discussion about a response. It's possible that they are going to continue to accumulate evidence before they have a serious discussion about a response. If they decide, it doesn't have to be Ukraine, by the way. If they decide, because it's possible that it wasn't Ukraine, but that it was a Western intelligence agency, one or more, it might have been done without any involvement of the Ukrainians and still implicate one or more Western intelligence agencies. If they come to the conclusion that it was Ukraine or a Western intelligence agency, I believe they will have a discussion about a nuclear attack. I'm not saying they'll do it, but I think they've reached the point where they will have a serious discussion, at least internally, about using nuclear weapons. I think that we have reached that point at this stage, because this sends a message, Rasheed. I think the way a rational person would interpret the message that this sends, and that the context in which all of this happened, that the message is that we will employ any and all means to destroy you. There's really no limit to what we're prepared to do to hurt you and your people. That's the message that this sends. There's no decency in our approach to dealing with you. We have no regard whatsoever for human rights, for humanity, for international law, for the laws of war. All of that means nothing to us in our dealings with you, and we will employ any and all tactics, weapons at our disposal to harm you. If that's what the Russian government interprets this to mean, I think that will be the message that they will take away from it. Then they will have to seriously consider, according to their own nuclear doctrine, a nuclear response. That's how dangerous this situation currently is. And if they, for those of us who are religious, I'm not, but let us pray they don't come to that conclusion. Then I'm not sure what other option they have available to them other than the complete and utter destruction of Ukraine. We're seeing a little bit of that now because they've begun to go after the actual power generation centers. Before, they were focusing, when they were attacking the electricity system of Ukraine, they were going after the infrastructure that transmits energy. They were largely restraining themselves from destroying the facilities that produce energy. They have now begun to go after the facilities that produce energy, so they have the capacity, especially with the effectively eviscerated air defense systems of Ukraine, to basically de-electrify the entire country. I think that they now have that capacity. To my mind, that's the minimum response that we can anticipate at this stage. They are basically going to destroy the electricity grid of Ukraine. So that, and imagine the impacts that this is going to have on the populace. I mean, here where I am in Beirut, for several months now, actually, I think it's been a couple of years, they've been in a situation where they were able to generate electricity through the national electricity grid for only a few hours a day. So everybody responded to that by going out and buying generators, those who could afford them. The people who can't afford generators and the gas that it takes to power the generators just have to deal with electricity for 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day. This is absolutely devastating in terms of being able to cause to keep an economy functioning. Ukraine will be plunged into a massive depression. This will be hugely destabilizing to Ukraine. There's going to be a further outflow of millions of Ukrainians into Europe at a moment when the tolerance levels of Europeans for, massive influxes of desperate migrants is at an all-time low, in my opinion, certainly in my lifetime. So this will in turn cause massive destabilization to Europe. I think this is the best case scenario we're looking at if Russia decides that either a Western government or Ukraine itself are responsible. And it could be a lot worse than that. I mean, I wouldn't rule out Dimitri Medvedev, the former president who's now a member of the Security Council. He said very clearly, we're going to kill everybody. There's not going to be any trials. There's not going to be any due process. Any person, he was very clear, he stressed this, any person that we determine to have been involved in this is a dead man. So let's imagine that, they determine that Americans are involved in this. The obvious implication is they're going to kill those people. They will hunt them down and kill them. And we're into World War III potentially at that stage. That's, as I said at the very outset, this is a terrifying moment.
Something else that took place that went under the radar that I don't think a lot of people think about. When these events took place, Poland activated its air force, and their warplanes went into the sky. Why would Poland activate their warplanes in a situation where a terrorist bombing took place in another nation, in the capital of another nation, specifically and especially in Russia?
I wasn't aware of that, but I think that's an excellent question. as I said, I think at least they have enough sense about them to grasp that Russia's response is going to be severe if they come to the conclusion. And I think that what you just said, which was news to me, is an indication of that Poland took an unusual defensive measure. Precisely. I mean, I'd like to know who was in those airplanes. Were those airplanes, the leadership of Poland? Did they start circling around Warsaw because they were concerned about a nuclear strike? I wouldn't rule out that possibility. All I know is what you've just told me about it. But that's the level of danger that we're at, where, there could be a nuclear attack at any minute. The moment the Russians decide that the West is involved in this, if they come to that conclusion, I don't think that's going to happen. But I think the risk of that happening now is higher than it's ever been in my lifetime. And I've been around since 1963.
Do you believe that the pressure from the hawks in Russia and the outrage of the people in Russia over the deaths will force Vladimir Putin to issue strike orders to surrounding areas, say for instance Poland? Because let's just say Russia determined that these so-called these terrorists were acting under orders from Poland or something like that. This would not be an attack on Poland. This would be a response to what Poland ordered. You understand? Mm-hmm. So do you believe that Russia, because Dimitri Medvedev had already said that Russia may strike beyond Ukraine's borders, and do you believe that the pressure from the war hawks or the people in power in Russia and from the citizens will force Vladimir Putin's hands to show that they're not playing and strike outside of the territory of Ukraine?
I think it depends on the level of confidence they have in their conclusions, because there's a range of potential, confidence levels. They might have enough evidence which causes them to have a strong suspicion of Western involvement, but they adjudge that the evidence does not lead to a probability of Western involvement. If they come to the conclusion, after having assessed whatever evidence they're able to accumulate, that with high confidence, I don't think they're going to, resort to extreme measures only in a case of certainty. But if they have high confidence that a Western government is involved, I believe there will be a military retaliation of some kind. It might not be, by the way, a direct military retaliation. It could be through a proxy. So, for example, one alternative that's open to the Russian Federation is to provide sophisticated missiles to Ansar Allah in Yemen, so that they can sink a British destroyer or an American aircraft carrier. That's an option that's available to the Russians. I would be very surprised if they wouldn't do something at least that severe if they reach the conclusion with a high level of confidence that the Americans and or the British are involved in this. I can't believe at this stage, after all the restraint, and yes, whatever people think about Putin and his government, they have shown a considerable amount of restraint in responding to Western provocations. I just can't believe they're going to restrain themselves any longer. There will be a direct military response against any Western government that is adjudged with high confidence to have been involved in this terrorist attack. The nature of that response, who knows?
One of our viewers says that Poland said that a Russian missile transited Poland. I have no information on that. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't. But again, I wouldn't be surprised by anything at this stage.
Okay. You broke up for a second. Could you say that again?
Yeah, I just said at this stage I really don't have anything to add, because this is the first I'm hearing about it. But I wouldn't be surprised by anything at this stage. And if in fact there are, the situation is so tense that if the Europeans think missiles launched by the Russians are coming their way, even if in fact the missiles aren't intended to strike Western targets, they themselves may preemptively launch a strike on Russia. That's the level of tension that we're at now. If they come to the conclusion that they're about to be struck by missiles, even if they're conventional in nature, I mean, anything is possible at that stage. I can only come back to what I said. I've been saying this for months, Rasheed. These people are our leaders are an existential danger to all humanity. I mean, let's be clear about this. The truth must be spoken, not just to our enemies. They're an existential danger to us. We need to replace these people with sane, responsible human beings as quickly as possible.
And I found the article. It's by Dimitri Lascaris. He's a professor, a research professor at the Higher School of Economics and a lead research fellow at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations. He is also a member of the Russian International Affairs Council. And in his article that he wrote that was published in RT, the headline is Dimitri Lascaris, it's time for Russia to give the West a nuclear reminder. I mean, that says it all. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, I visited Russia for the first time in March of last year, or April, I believe it was. I spent a month there. I was in Moscow and Crimea. And the reason why I went there, Rashid, is because I went there on my own dime. Nobody invited me, nobody compensated me, reimbursed my expenses, because I felt that at that stage, things were extraordinarily dangerous. And as someone with a bit of a public profile, I wanted to try to facilitate a dialogue with people in Russian society, not just people in the government, but people in civil society. The entity that you've just mentioned, the Russian International Affairs Council, I actually had a 2-hour meeting with the director general of that organization. That is a very, very serious organization in the formulation of Russian foreign policy. This is not some fringe organization. If somebody who is speaking in the name of the Russian International Affairs Council is openly calling for a nuclear strike, this is a very serious matter. That's not to say that the Russian government will heed him, but we're talking about people here who are at the core of the Russian political elite. They're openly, calling for this measure to be taken. It's really testimony to how severe the situation has become.
And what is your thoughts on how the United States immediately after this, and we'll transit to what's going on in the Middle East shortly, but what are your thoughts on the flip-flopping of the U.S. position as the situation unfolded with the terrorist bombing? Because they went from not knowing anything and saying no prejudgment to then it goes to Ukraine is not involved, and then and for a while they wouldn't even really send condolences or anything, and all of a sudden there was an international uproar and outcry about it. Then they started talking about civilians, but they prefaced their support for the civilians with saying that, well, people are against this government. Even after Vladimir Putin won 89% of the vote in this recent election, the election was a week or 2 weeks ago, and he won 89%. So
with 77% turnout.
Oh yeah, yes, I forgot about that one. 77% of the turnout of 160 million Russians. So what is your thought about the U.S. flip-flopping and changing its position constantly as the environment from the fallout from this explosion and this terrorist attack unfold?
Well, I just don't think at this stage that the United States government or the British government, frankly, any major Western government, could have lower credibility than it already has, even before this terrorist attack. And I'm going to just remind people about two incidents. There's so many, examples I can give of the dishonesty of Western governments and the scurrilous nature of their dealings with, governments to which they are officially opposed, namely China, Russia, and Iran, principally. And that is, at the very outset, about a month before, actually, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Biden gave a press conference. At that point in time, everybody was saying there's going to be an invasion. And in the press conference, he said, if Russia invades Ukraine, we will end Nord Stream. Came right out and said it. And Victoria Nuland, who at that time was a senior official in the U.S. State Department, made essentially the same statement in testimony to, it was either Congress or the Senate. And then Nord Stream is blown sky high. And immediately, I remember this clear as day, the Western governments and all the mainstream Western media organizations immediately said that Russia had blown up its own pipeline. Mm-hmm. Well, in that period of time, and they did this despite the fact that Biden and Nuland had just said some 6 or 7 months earlier that they would end Nord Stream if, I think the way Nuland put it was that the Nord Stream is going to be a pile of junk at the bottom of the sea. She was even more aggressive in her commentary. And so they accuse Russia, and within a matter of 2 or 3 months, they retract the accusation. And then the major media organizations in the West, with effectively the acquiescence of Western governments, began to accuse the Ukrainians of having done it. Mm-hmm. Now, they said Zelensky didn't know about it, but there were rogue elements within the Ukrainian military who actually blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. I, by the way, don't believe any of this. I believe that the Americans and the British were behind it, just as Seymour Hersh reported in a very detailed investigative report citing sources inside the United States government. But at the end of the day, what that incident proves is that you can't trust these people. You know, they'll accuse anybody in order to avoid having to take responsibility for their own actions. The other incident I want to mention is that there was early on in this conflict, this was another very dangerous moment, but not as dangerous as this in my mind. And that was that 2 missiles left Ukrainian airspace after the invasion and struck Poland and killed 2 Polish farmers. Mm-hmm. Immediately, everybody in the Western mainstream media and the Ukrainian government pointed the finger at the Russians. And fortunately, the Poles and the American government and the Secretary General of NATO, because I think they realized that this had the potential to become World War III, they immediately, not immediately, within 48 hours, they contradicted Zelensky and said, no, these were 2 errant missiles that were fired, air defense missiles that were fired by Ukrainian forces and ended up landing mistakenly in the territory of Ukraine. I should mention one other incident, and that is Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany, and François Hollande, the former President of France, admitting within the past 6 months, I think, that the Minsk Accords were basically a ruse, and that the reason why they entered into the Minsk Accords, which were supposed to effectively resolve the civil war in Ukraine, was simply to buy more time for them to arm Ukraine. And Putin and other senior members of the U.S. government have talked about this many times. They're very bitter about this. They feel they were taken for a ride. And then there's, I got to add one other thing. You know, there was the promise that was made to Gorbachev at the end of at the time of the reunification of Germany. You know, and there's a mountain of evidence. There's an archive at George Washington University, which contains a mountain of evidence that Gorbachev was assured that NATO would not expand eastward in exchange for the Soviet Union's agreement that Germany could reunify. That was a big deal for, you know, the Soviet Union to agree to that, because Germany killed 27 million people in the Soviet Union, far more than all of the Western states combined. So for him to agree to that, it took a lot, and he did it on the basis that there wouldn't be any NATO expansion, and they repeatedly expanded NATO. Not once, but I think there were 4 rounds of expansion. So at this stage, Western governments have absolutely zero credibility. There is pretty much nothing that they could say which would cause them to have less credibility. The Russians are going to come to their own conclusions based entirely upon their own investigation, and I don't think they're going to attach any weight. And whatever flip-flopping goes on, it's too late now. They simply have no trust whatsoever in Western governments. Dimitri, and that of course, heightens the danger of this moment.
You know, I was receiving some information like right prior to this bombing in Russia that French, Polish, some U.S. specialists and some British specialists were being transferred into Ukraine. I'm talking about prior to the bombing. And if I got this information, and I'm not an intelligence agent, I know Russia received this information also. And then you put that on the back of the belligerent stance of the French president, the threats from the West, the constant provocations, and then the bombing that took place. And then right after that, Poland sends warplanes up into the skies over Poland. I mean, a circumstantial case it is, but it looks like some of this was directed by the West, and they wanted to have plausible deniability in case things went wrong. But Russia caught the culprits that took place, and they tried to put it on an Islamic State, which everybody knows that Islamic State, aka ISIS, they use Islamic State to demonize Islam, but we know that ISIS is a contraption or a vehicle of Western imperialism. What do you think the situation will devolve into if Russia has that mind? This was done deliberately by the UK or France or whatever. What do you think that they will respond to them directly?
I think that, it's so hard to predict. I mean, I think that Putin's natural inclination will be to impose a severe price. Again, I'm assuming, and let's hope this doesn't happen, that they come to the conclusion with a high level of confidence, not a low level of confidence, but a high level of confidence the Western government was involved. I think Putin's natural disposition will be to impose a severe price on the ultimately responsible party or parties, but to do it in a way that gives the Russian Federation plausible deniability. So that, in other words, he will try to do it in a way that allows the West to avoid responding with an escalation. Because if they are openly seen to be imposing a severe price, particularly a military price, on a Western nation, a NATO member, it's going to be very difficult for NATO not to respond with a further escalation. So I think he's going to want to try to avoid that, while at the same time engaging in an escalation that is commensurate with the severity of what has been done to the Russian Federation. Again, I'm not saying that the West is behind. I don't know. I don't purport to know who's responsible for this terrorist attack, but I think that that's what he's going to want to do. The challenge for him is going to be, if he imposes a price in a way that preserves plausible deniability, that's not going to make the Russian people very happy. They're going to want to know that Russia imposed a severe price on the people who are responsible. So he's in a real quandary now. The level of anger in Russia, I just don't see it dissipating anytime soon. I think it's at unprecedented levels. And so that may politically be an option that's simply not available anymore, and that he's going to have to be seen to be imposing a severe price on the people who are responsible for this. And at that stage, all bets are off. I don't know what else to say. I mean, if I were, given the opportunity to advise Western leaders at this stage, I would say to them, look, whether or not you are responsible for this, you don't want the Russians to come to the conclusion that you are. And you have so little trust right now. You have completely, you have so little credibility with the Russian Federation at this stage that there's a real risk they'll come to the conclusion you're responsible, even if you're not. And there's only one way to avoid this thing spinning out of control under the circumstances. And that's, you better go to them right now and negotiate a resolution to the Ukraine war, which involves very serious territorial concessions by Ukraine. And you need to take the whole issue of NATO membership for Ukraine completely and unequivocally off the table. Now is the time to sit down at the table and to make serious concessions. You should have done this 2 years ago, and there was an attempt made which wouldn't have involved the cession of, the Donbass and Luhansk and Kherson region and Zaporozhye to the Russians. They could have had a deal back in March 2022, 1 month into the war, which would have been a much better deal that Ukraine can have now, but they tanked that deal. Now the only way to avoid an escalation, in my opinion, is to actually sit down and make the concessions that the painful concessions that will make peace possible. I think that's the only way at this stage to stop the Russians from escalating in a severe manner if they come to the conclusion that Ukraine or a Western government are responsible for this. And I'm hoping, I think that's the only way out of this at this stage is they need to sit down at the table and start offering some serious concessions to the Russians.
I believe that President Putin, he can't go soft, or he can't do as he's normally done, hitting decision-making centers around Ukraine. I think he has to do a little bit more due to the fact that they have lost a couple of warships. They have lost civilian through the direct bombing. And while the United States and Britain and the rest of the world kept saying, the rest of the Western world kept saying, we will continue to supply these weapons, and they were striking Belgorod and the surrounding regions, and they've sabotaged. They tried to blow up the bridge. They even were caught on audio, and all of this stuff is going. I think all of this makes for an explosive situation, and I believe that with the anger and outrage of the people, specifically because these were targeted at the youth, I think that's more than anything. It was targeted at the youth to take out as many Russian youth as possible. I believe that he is going to have to show a strong hand, because the war hawks behind him and the people that are outraged will demand that. And as a leader, you've got to show yourself to be able to respond to any threat, regardless if it's America or NATO, to keep your people secure. If not, what's the use of you being president?
Yeah, and Rasheed, the youth were the segment of the Russian population which until now were least supportive of Vladimir Putin. Whoever's responsible for this has just radicalized the youth, which was the one segment which was ambivalent about Putin's rule. So who now is going to apply pressure on the Russian government to exercise restraint? I mean, this is absolute insanity. I think, the best case scenario, if Putin comes to the conclusion that, a Western government is behind this and that he can't react through a proxy and, like the Houthis, for example, and maintain plausible deniability, I think the best case scenario is that they will attack major naval vessels of one or more Western countries. And you're going to see, an aircraft carrier at the bottom of the sea. I think that's probably the best case scenario. They may launch, some Kinzhals at a major NATO military base in Eastern Europe. That's another possibility. But I hope to God that I'm wrong about this, but I don't see how they will be able to refrain from a direct attack on a NATO country if they come to the conclusion that a NATO country, again, with a high level of confidence, that a NATO country is had serious involvement in this terrorist attack. That's why we need to sit down at the table as quickly as possible. But again, these people who run our governments are complete lunatics. So I don't know if they're going to have the good sense to do that. I very much doubt that they will.
We have a few minutes left, but I want to put, before we use these last few minutes on what's going on in the Middle East, I want to run something by you. I've been checking Sputnik, and I've been checking RT on all of its platforms. And the people, they are saying, hey, look, this has NATO written all over. This has the United States written all over it. I was looking at one serviceman who is Russian, but he served in the U.S. Armed Forces, and his daughter was supposed to be at the concert, but she was on restriction, and her friends, I believe, he said he think that they're dead because they can't reach him, and he was outraged, and you could see it in his eyes, and you could hear it in his voice, and he was pretty much demanding a response to what took place, and he was demanding a response to the purpose, not just the Ukraine, but the ones who orchestrated this. And that is what a source of mine over there was telling me about. On the ground, the people they are really outraged because this was targeted against the youth. So I don't see any way to not confront NATO, because the people don't believe that it was just Ukraine.
Yeah, and in the background, and this may be a good segue into the whole conversation about Palestine, is The whole world's been watching a genocide unfold in Gaza, and who's providing the weapons?
Right.
Who's making it possible? It's the West. It's the United States, Britain, and Germany principally. They are actually the bombs that are being dropped, the artillery shells, the missiles that are killing, and have killed over 13,000 Palestinian children, 25,000 women and children approximately. And that's the number that was quoted by the U.S. Secretary of Defense to Congress in recent testimony. So I'm not asking anybody here to take the words of Hamas. This was coming out of the mouth of the U.S. Defense Secretary. And so people in Russia and around the world are looking at this, and they're saying they've already come to the conclusion before the terrorist attack in Moscow that Western governments are capable of any level of depravity, that they attach zero value to civilian life, absolutely no value to civilian life. So it's eminently believable to the majority of people in this world who've been watching the horrors unfolding in Gaza that the United States and Britain and other Western governments are perfectly capable of orchestrating a heinous terrorist attack in Moscow. It's eminently believable. So at the end of the day, even if it isn't true, the Russian people may very well come to that conclusion. And I imagine a lot of them already have. And there's almost nothing you can do to disabuse them of that belief.
Well, do you think that it will escalate in the Syrian area and in that surrounding area? Because we see constant provocations from Israel. And it seems like Israel being on this last leg, it seems like they are trying to draw in the surrounding areas into a wider war. And why would they do that knowing that they don't have the capability to beat Hezbollah or its allies?
Well, I think that they're trying to what they've been doing, Rasheed. This is the third time I've come to Lebanon in the last year, and on each occasion I visited the border areas, South Lebanon, where the hostilities are taking place. I was there, in fact, just 6 hours, or yesterday, I should say, in the afternoon, with a Lebanese journalist, and we were standing a couple of kilometers away from the northernmost point of Israel, and there were explosions going off. We could hear them in the distance. We heard at least 3 or 4 explosions. So this is the assaults are now happening from each side of the border multiple times every day, and this has been going on for months. And Israel has been, I think there's a clear pattern to Israel's behavior. What it's trying to do is to provoke a large-scale missile attack by Hezbollah without being seen to have provoked it. Because in order for the American government to justify direct military involvement in an attack on Hezbollah and Iran, they're going to have to persuade the American public, who aren't going to want to go to war against, under normal circumstances, against Iran and Hezbollah, that they launched an unprovoked attack on Israel. So Israel's been playing this really diabolical, clever, cynical, dangerous game where they're escalating, for example, killing a senior member of Hamas right in Beirut a couple of months ago, but without causing so much death and destruction that Westerners look at the situation and say, well, Hezbollah had no alternative but to launch a large-scale attack on Israel. That's the game they've been playing. Why have they been playing that game? Because they want the American government to send its military forces in, precisely because they know they can't defeat Hezbollah, let alone Iran. They don't have the capacity to do that unless they use nukes. And they can't even do that with respect to Hezbollah because Hezbollah is on their border.
Right.
They can nuke Iran, but they can't nuke Hezbollah. So they need the United States to come in hard and heavy with its full conventional forces. They themselves are not, today when we were standing, or yesterday when I was standing a couple of kilometers on this high point overlooking the northernmost settlement of Israel called Metula, this Lebanese journalist, he explained to me that in 2006, the Israelis, when they last launched a ground invasion into Lebanon, they actually didn't succeed in taking even temporarily a single village in South Lebanon. I wasn't aware of this. I thought that they had at least occupied a number of villages in South Lebanon. That's how badly they were defeated. And since then, the missile arsenal of Hezbollah has grown tenfold, and the missiles it possesses are much more precise and destructive. Plus, the Hezbollah forces gained a lot of combat experience in Syria, which they didn't have in 2006. So if Israel was incapable of defeating them then, you know it's incapable of defeating them now, but it's desperate to get rid of them. It's evacuated over 100,000 Israelis from the northern settlements, and they're all saying to the Israeli government, unless you get rid of Hezbollah, we're not going back. Basically, you know, the northern regions of Israel are going to end up being depopulated unless Israel takes out Hezbollah, but Israel can't. So it's going to do everything possible and has been doing everything possible to suck the United States into a direct conventional war with Hezbollah and Iran, which in and of itself is a very, very dangerous situation. You know, I don't want to harp on this too much, but people need to understand this is about as dangerous a moment as we've experienced in our lifetimes. We have to put maximum pressure on our governments to sit down at the table and negotiate as quickly as possible a resolution with the Russian government of that war, that it will involve serious concessions by Ukraine and by the West. Otherwise, there won't be a peace deal and we're in real trouble.
Do you believe that if this take place, this talk, this behind the door talk, that also America would have to concede and leave Syria also? Because that's in Russia's interest also, to get America out of Syria. That's in Syria's interest, that's in Iran's interest, that's in Lebanon interest, that's in all of the regional nations' interest. Do you believe that if they so decided to come to the table, that this would be one of the main things that they would have to do?
I don't know if the Russian, it depends on what they're offering the Russians in terms of a new security architecture. I think the priority of Putin would be a new security architecture in Europe. And that means that he is going to want, his government's made this very clear for some time, he wants NATO forces and missiles to be withdrawn to the Soviet era borders of NATO. He's not saying that, you know, the Eastern European current Eastern European members of NATO need to withdraw from NATO. His government is accepting, and by the way, I think this is a major concession on his part, his government is accepting that they would be parties to the NATO treaty and that they would have the right to call upon other NATO members to come to their defense if they were attacked. The Russian Federation, as I understand, is willing to live with that. But it's always wanted, it's demanded for some time now, that NATO withdraw its forces to the 1991 borders of NATO, and particularly its missile arsenals. If they offered the Russian Federation that's a pretty important issue for the Russian Federation's national security. My guess is that they wouldn't demand an American withdrawal from Syria. But let's be very clear about this. Sooner or later, the United States is going to have to withdraw its forces from Syria. That situation is untenable. The soldiers who are there now are nothing but sitting ducks. And the level of anger in the region right now with the United States is sky high, and it's only going to get worse the way things are currently heading. The United States does not have the ability to protect its military bases in the Middle East any longer. It just doesn't. So that's inevitable.
I think it's when people look at the situation in Ukraine, they have to look at it on a global scale, because not only are NATO nations trying to subjugate Russia through Ukraine, they're using Georgia, Moldova, they're using Armenia, and then it goes down through the Middle Eastern areas with putting pressure on Iran, to put pressure on Lebanon, to put pressure on Syria. All of these areas are strategic. And if you look at the situation prior to the so-called influx of ISIS through the Middle East, you will see that I thought it started in Lebanon with the assassination of Rafiq Hariri. And they forced the Syrian military out through pressure. And this allowed Israel to have a freer hand militarily over Lebanon and Syria. And now when we look at the situation, we see the whole region destabilized. Dimitri, how long do you think that this can happen? I don't care if America is the global superpower. How long can you go around the world pushing war and destabilization, and at home your economy is collapsing, and you still want to be the hegemon? How long can that go on?
I think the gig is up. I don't think it can go on any longer. The issue that we're confronting right now is, will the political elites in the West, particularly in Washington, accept that era is over? the era of U.S. hegemony, the era of the U.S. projecting its power throughout the Middle East, the South Pacific, Eastern Europe, and doing it all at the same time, is finished. America simply doesn't have the capacity. And the opponents of the United States, the adversaries, are too powerful economically, politically, and militarily for them to dominate any longer. The issue for all of us, and it's an existential one, is will they accept this? Or are they going to continue to escalate until we end up in a nuclear holocaust? That's a serious question that we have to grapple with the utmost urgency. And unfortunately, Rasheed, I've got to go because I have another call.
Yeah, I was going
but I would like to leave it there. I urge everybody to contact your congressperson and tell them to sit down at the table and negotiate with the Russians immediately.
Hey, Dimitri, thank you, man. I'll send you this later on. Hey, man, you be blessed, be safe out there, and I really appreciate it.
You too, brother. Great talking to you. Take care.
All right. Everybody, listen. We had a channel member stream that was planned for the day, but because Dimitri contacted me and said he could do this right to make up today, I have to push the channel member stream back. I wanted to give you this while he was at the time he was in Palestine, but now he's in Lebanon, so I didn't even know that. I wanted to give you guys some good content and give you some of the best guests that you can think of. Okay. So, but we're going to get the channel member stream done. I cannot do it right now. My daughter's birthday was yesterday, and I'm cleaning up. I have an autistic daughter, not my oldest daughter, but I have an autistic daughter, and she had a birthday yesterday, and so we're cleaning up the mess that she had. So, I want to thank each and every one of you for giving me your time. All right, we're going to hit it hard next week. We're going to, and next week, please join us, especially Friday. On Friday morning, because we'll have Turkish journalist and historian and geopolitical analyst Tariq Amar on the show live from Istanbul. So please, I told you we're going to bring some good stuff to you. I'm working behind the scene, everybody. I'm working behind the scene, but I can't do this without you. First of all, I can't do it without God. God is numero uno. He's number one. And then after that is you guys. I need you guys to help support, get the word out, beat the algorithm, subscribe to all the platforms. If you can become a channel member, become a channel member. If you can go to the Patreon and subscribe, go to the Patreon and subscribe. And if not, just spread the word, tell everybody about this platform. And I want you to know that if you do that, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you to the depths of my soul. On that note, I'm going to go out the same way that I always come in, with love in my heart for each and every one of you if you love truth. But know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that my God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy still loves you more than life. Thank you, mama, for everything. Deuces, everybody. We're out of here.